Welcome to Filmtrospective, Beyond Oblivious.
And a huge welcome to our 10th episode. We are just, thrilled to have you listening today.
10 episodes. I mean, thank you so much for being here with us. And to really understand what we are unpacking this time around, I need you to mentally travel back to the year 1934.
Right, 1934. Picture the Great Depression, which is just completely suffocating the country at this point.
You've got massive unemployment, endless breadlines, and the national mood is, it's overwhelmingly bleak.
Understandably so.
Yeah, exactly. And yet, the absolute biggest hit at the box office, the movie audiences are flocking to see over and over, is about this filthy rich married couple.
Who basically do nothing but day drink.
Yes. They day drink, they lounge around in penthouses, and they solve murders strictly for their own amusement. I mean, they don't need the money. They don't even really care about justice.
Not at all.
So the question is, why on earth did an exhausted, struggling American public fall head over heels for characters they probably, should have deeply resented?
It is such a strange contradiction, honestly. I mean, by all the conventional logic of that era, the public should have been sharpening their pitchforks for a couple like Nick and Nora Charles.
Right. It makes no sense on paper.
But instead, they became the absolute blueprint for the modern on-screen marriage. And what makes this so fascinating to me is that this movie really, really shouldn't have worked. It was adapted from a deeply cynical, frankly depressing detective novel.
Yeah.
And it was made by a studio that frankly didn't even realize what it had until the box office receipts just started exploding.
Thinking about it now, it actually reminds me a lot of modern true crime influencers.
Oh, that is an interesting jump. Walk me through that parallel.
Well, think about the current landscape. You have all these people today who treat gruesome real-world tragedies as a quirky little hobby.
Right. They sit in their comfortable rooms with their ring lights and microphones, dissecting a murder like it is a puzzle game. But I think there's a vital distinction to make here. Modern internet personalities are usually dissecting these cases for clout, right? For followers, for sponsors, for attention.
True. There is a heavy monetization aspect to it today.
But our protagonists in 1934, they were not performing for an audience. They were genuinely doing it for the sheer thrill of it.
They were independently wealthy, entirely self-contained, and just deeply, deeply bored.
Yes. And that carefree attitude blew standard Hollywood conventions completely out of the water. It fundamentally redefined the detective genre.
Which is exactly what we're going to get into today.
Yeah.
We are taking a deep dive into the 1934 classic, The Thin Man.
Released on May 25th by MGM. And what is really fascinating about this production is the timeline.
It was a very modest budget film, wasn't it?
Extremely modest and shot on a notoriously tight schedule. We are talking less than 3 weeks from start to finish.
Wait, how do you even shoot a feature film that quickly?
You hired W.S. Van Dyke to direct. The man was literally nicknamed One Take Woody.
So he prioritized momentum over perfection then.
Precisely. He despised over-rehearsing. He wanted to capture a frantic, breezy energy on set.
Which explains so much about the pacing of the film. It never feels bogged down. It just flies.
But to pull that off, you need a brilliant technical crew.
Yeah.
And they had James Wong Howe as the cinematographer.
Oh, Mao was a legend. How did he manage the lighting if they were moving that fast, though?
He had to be exceptionally inventive. He used multiple cameras and basically flooded the sets with light so actors could move freely without hitting strict, tiny marks.
That makes total sense. It allowed for a much more natural, improvisational feel.
It also helped flawlessly merge all these competing genres.
Right, because this is not just a straightforward mystery. It is adapted from Dashiell Hammett's final novel.
By the husband and wife screenwriting duo, Albert Hackett and Francis Goodrich.
And they took this gritty, hard-boiled detective fiction and infused it with sophisticated romance.
Plus a very heavy dose of screwball comedy. It is a brilliant tightrope walk.
We really have to touch on the cultural context, though, because the timing of the release is everything.
December 1933 is when Prohibition was officially repealed. The Thin Man comes out just a few months later.
So this is a post-Prohibition world. And the casual, celebratory drinking in this film is everywhere.
It is practically its own character. Audiences had just endured over a decade of moral policing regarding alcohol.
So buying a ticket to see this glamorous couple openly enjoy their cocktails, it must have felt electric.
It acted as a massive cultural release valve, a collective joyous sigh of relief for the nation.
Before we get into the story itself, I want you to picture the original theatrical poster for this film.
It is quite striking in its simplicity. A very stark, solid blue background.
But look at the actors featured on it.
The names William Powell and Myrna Loy dominate the text, which makes sense. But the actual artwork depicts William Powell sharing cocktails with Maureen O'Sullivan,
Who plays the client, Dorothy Wynant.
Yes. Why on earth are they showing Nick and Dorothy sharing a drink instead of the legendary pair of Nick and Nora?
It seems like a glaring error today, but you have to view it through the lens of 1934 marketing realities. Maureen O'Sullivan was a massive box office draw right at that moment.
Because of the Tarzan franchise.
Precisely. She was fresh off a global MGM success, playing Jane opposite Johnny Weissmuller, so she was guaranteed to put butts in seats.
That makes commercial sense, I suppose. The studio leans on the proven star.
Plus, from a pure plot mechanics perspective, her character is the narrative catalyst. Dorothy is the one who essentially hires Nick to find her missing father.
So the studio wanted to establish that classic detective and client dynamic on the poster. Meanwhile, Myrna Loy was in a very strange transitional phase of her career.
She had spent nearly a decade heavily typecast. Studios constantly put her in these exotic vamp or villainous roles,
Which feels completely disconnected from the warm, sophisticated Nora Charles we know today.
Studio head Louis B. Mayer seriously doubted she could play a relatable American wife. The director, Van Dyke, had to fight tooth and nail just to get her cast.
We will absolutely get into how Van Dyke proved her comedic chops later because the behind-the-scenes stories are wild.
But the film's release ultimately caught MGM completely off guard. The breezy chemistry between Powell and Loy was an overnight sensation.
It catapulted Loy to superstardom instantly, and you better believe all subsequent marketing for the franchise focused strictly on Nick and Nora.
Note the tagline on that poster too, Dashiell Hammett's Master Mystery.
Selling witty charm and literary pedigree over sheer violence. It promised a stylish puzzle.
Which brings us perfectly to the story itself. Let's set the scene and look at how this narrative unfolds. We open in a workshop.
And it is shadowy, heavily silhouetted against a wall. James Wong Howe is doing brilliant work here.
He establishes a moody, almost German expressionist atmosphere right out of the gate. If you walked into the theater, you'd think you were watching a standard noir thriller.
Yeah, we meet Clyde Wynant, the eccentric, wealthy inventor. He is highly irritated because his assistant, Tanner, keeps interrupting him.
Wynant is so absorbed in his work that he doesn't even realize his doting daughter, Dorothy, and her fiancé, Tommy, have come to visit.
Right, Dorothy is trying to plan her wedding. Her mother is insisting on a massive, elaborate affair, which Dorothy just hates.
And Wynant is entirely dismissive of all of it. He announces he is going into complete seclusion to work on a secret, highly important invention.
He literally complains there is, quote, no peace, no quiet, everybody interrupting me. But he does make one crucial promise before he vanishes.
He refuses to tell anyone where he is going, but he swears he will return for Dorothy's wedding on December 30th to give her away.
So the ticking clock of the narrative is set. Now, the family dynamics established in this first scene are instantly messy.
Oh, very messy. Wynant is recently divorced from his ex-wife, Mimi, and Mimi has already remarried a man named Christian Jorgensen.
The divorce happened because Wynant was having a blown affair with his pretty blonde secretary, Julia Wolfe.
Before Wynant leaves for his sabbatical, he puts his lawyer, Herbert Macaulay, in charge of all his financial affairs.
Macaulay's job is just to wire money to Julia when she needs it, handle business correspondence, that sort of administrative work.
But just before walking out the door, Wynant discovers a major complication. $50,000 in government bonds are missing from his office safe.
And those bonds were meant to be Dorothy's wedding present. So Wynant questions his clerk, Tanner, who immediately points the finger at the mistress, Julia.
So Wynant storms into Julia's apartment to confront her. And who happens to be standing in her living room?
A known mobster named Joe Morelli.
Yeah. Morelli quickly exits, but Wynant is furious. He suspects Julia of two-timing him, which apparently is a recurring theme in their relationship.
Julia plays innocent, of course. She blames Wynant's absent-mindedness, suggesting he misplaced the bonds, but Wynant threatens her with embezzlement charges.
And the threat works. She cracks and promises to return $25,000, claiming that is all she actually took.
Wynant presses her on who took the other half, but right then, the phone rings, Wynant picks it up, and the caller just hangs up in total silence.
Wynant leaves the apartment with this highly ominous bearing. And by the way, that silent caller is a man named Nunheim. We need to remember that name.
We definitely do. So the film cuts to 3 months later. It is Christmas Eve. We are in a fancy, crowded, brightly lit restaurant.
The visual contrast from the shadowy workshop is striking. The noir lighting is completely gone, replaced by flat, bright comedy lighting.
Dorothy is dancing with Hami, but she is frantic. Her father hasn't returned, and the wedding is just days away.
And then, roughly 11 minutes into the film, we finally meet our hero, Nick Charles.
This entrance is brilliant. We find Nick at the bar, giving the professional bartenders a highly detailed, pedantic lesson on how to mix martinis.
And he is visibly well on his way to being entirely inebriated.
He tells the bartenders, the important thing is the rhythm. Always have rhythm in your shaking. Now in Manhattan, you shake to foxtrot time, a Bronx to two-step time, a dry martini, you always shake to waltz time.
It perfectly establishes his character in 20 seconds. He's suave, glib, and prioritizes leisure and liquor over absolutely everything else.
So Dorothy approaches him at the bar. She recognizes him from her childhood, back when he was a, quote, real-live detective who once saved her father from a hitman.
And she practically begs him for help finding her father.
But Nick just brushes it off. He tells her he's been living out in California for 4 years, hasn't heard a word from Wynant, and suggests she call the lawyer Macaulay.
Which she has already done, to no avail. So as Dorothy steps away to use a phone booth, we get one of the most famous character entrances in Hollywood history.
Yes. Nora Charles arrives, the camera cuts, and Nora is being forcefully pulled into the crowded restaurant by their wire fox terrier, Asta.
She's balancing this massive armful of wrapped Christmas presents, trying to navigate the crowd.
And she just face plants, she trips and sprawls flat on the floor, scattering boxes everywhere.
It is a phenomenal subversion of the glamorous female lead, but she handles it with such grace and good humor.
It turns out Asta dragged her through every single gin mill on the block looking for Nick, which is how she finally located him. Dorothy comes back, gets a quick, polite introduction to Nora, and leaves with Tommy to try Macaulay's office again.
Then Nick and Nora settle in for drinks. And this banter is where the magic really happens.
Nora sits down, struggling to keep pace, and asks, "Say, how many drinks have you had?"
Mick casually replies, "This will make 6 martinis."
So Nora turns right to the waiter and says, "All right, will you bring me 5 more martinis, Leo, and line them right up here?"
I love that. You can see exactly why audiences in 1934 were obsessed with them. It's a husband and wife, clearly deeply in love, just enjoying each other's company and drinking each other under the table.
Which leads to a very relatable scene the next morning in their hotel suite. Nora wakes up with a brutal hangover.
She groans, "What hit me?" And Nick, perfectly composed, says, "The last martini. How about a pick-me-up?"
Casual hair of the dog. But their relaxation is interrupted. The doorbell rings, and it's the lawyer, Macaulay.
Macaulay is worried about Wynant's ex-wife, Mimi. She is back in town trying to squeeze money out of the estate.
And Macaulay asks Nick directly if he is sleuthing for Mimi.
Nick is so clear about his boundaries here. He states he retired 4 years ago. His only job now is managing his newlywed, wealthy wife's affairs.
Which basically means spending her fortune and enjoying the high life.
Macaulay mentions he hasn't seen Wynant in 3 months. Wynant just sends written word through the mistress, Julia Wolfe, whenever he needs cash.
Then Macaulay gets a phone call right there at the hotel.
And Nick and Nora are literally goofing around in the background while Macaulay takes this serious call.
The voice on the line says Wynant has reappeared and wants to meet immediately, so Macaulay rushes off.
Nick, trying to be helpful, calls Dorothy to tell her the good news that her father is back. But Mimi, the greedy ex-wife, intercepts the call.
She physically cranes her neck, trying to eavesdrop on the earpiece. Once she realizes Wynant is back in town, she panics.
Because her new husband, Jorgensen, is an unemployed freeloader. She desperately needs Wynant's money to maintain her lifestyle.
Right. Jorgensen is sulking in the bedroom about his lack of respect, basically demanding Mimi go confront Julia Wolfe to get some cash.
Which she does. Mimi goes to Julia's apartment, walks in the door, and finds Julia murdered on the floor.
And this is where Mimi's fundamental greed kicks in. Instead of just calling the police like a normal person, she notices something.
She sees Wynant's distinct watch chain clutched in Julia's dead hand.
So she secretly steals it. She tells herself she is protecting Wynant from being implicated, but really she just wants to make sure her personal gravy train doesn't go to jail.
Then the police arrive at the scene. The film does a great job here of intercutting several quick scenes to build the mystery mechanics.
Yeah, we see the silent caller, Nunheim, slipping out of Julia's building. We see Nunheim's girlfriend demanding money from him. We see the gangster, Morelli, finding out Julia was bumped off.
Lieutenant John Guild questions Macaulay, who confirms he gave Julia $1,000 for Wynant the day before.
Guild immediately suspects Wynant. The cash is missing. The mistress is dead. It looks like a robbery murder by a desperate man.
Meanwhile, back at Mimi's apartment, Guild questions her. She convincingly denies touching anything at the crime scene.
But as soon as the cops leave, Dorothy walks in and catches her mother hiding the stolen watch chain in the wall safe.
Dorothy is devastated. She thinks this is absolute proof that her father is the killer.
Which brings the plot back to Nick and Nora. They decide to throw a Christmas party in their suite.
And let's look at the mechanics of this scene.
Yeah.
Because it's not your standard high society gathering. It is a complete subversion of class expectations.
You'd expect wealthy socialites in tuxedos sipping champagne. Instead, the room is packed with ex-convicts, a professional boxer, his promoter, and aggressive tabloid reporters.
People from Nick's former life as a working-class detective mingling with Nora's high society world.
And Nora's entirely unfazed by it. She finds the ex-convicts utterly charming.
I have to pause you there, though. Does she actually love the grit, or does she just love the idea of it from a safe distance?
That is a fantastic distinction. She is definitely insulated by her wealth. She treats the convicts almost like amusing zoo animals. It's poverty tourism for her.
Right. She wants the thrill of a murder case, but she doesn't fully grasp the real danger.
During the party, news of the murder breaks over the radio. Reporters swarm Nick, but he waves them off, joking, "I'm only in town because my wife's on a bender. I'm trying to sober her up."
Nora steps into the kitchen with him and practically begs him to take the case. She eagerly lists the clues: no gun, no fingerprints.
Nick shuts it down firmly. He says, "I haven't time. I'm much too busy seeing that you don't lose any of the money I married you for."
Then Dorothy arrives at the party, totally distraught. To protect her dad, she actually confesses to killing Julia herself. She pulls out a fake pawn shop gun as proof.
But Nick is a seasoned detective. He sees right through the lie instantly, gently takes the gun, and tosses it in a drawer.
Mimi shows up too, wanting private help. Nick turns her down and manages to shoo both of them out the door before the reporters can pounce.
The phone rings. It's Nunheim, the silent caller from earlier. He wants to meet Nick to discuss a, quote, proposition regarding Julia Wolfe.
But mid-sentence, a mysterious hand reaches out and cuts the phone line.
It's a chilling moment. That night, Nick and Nora are getting ready for sleep in their separate twin beds, conforming to 1930s censorship rules, of course.
And Nora is still badgering him about the case. She asks about her Christmas presents, hoping she doesn't like them so she can return them.
Nick quips that she has to keep them anyway because the man at the aquarium won't take them back.
Suddenly, there is a loud knock. Nora opens the door, and a man walks straight into their bedroom holding a gun.
It's Joe Morelli, the gangster from Julia's apartment.
He is terrified. He's being framed by Nunheim for Julia's murder, and he wants Nick to clear his name.
Nick calmly tells him to go to the police. Then, there is another sudden, sharp knock at the door.
Morelli panics, thinking it's a police trap, and draws his weapon.
And Nick's reaction here is phenomenal comedy. He doesn't dive for cover.
Good.
He literally punches Nora square in the jaw, knocking her out cold.
Just to get her out of the line of fire.
Mm-hmm.
He throws a pillow at Morelli, a shot goes off, and Nick gets grazed by a bullet just as the police burst in and arrest the gangster.
They revive Nora with a drink, and is she mad about being punched in the face by her husband? Not at all.
She complains, "You darn fool, you didn't have to knock me out. I knew you'd take him, but I wanted to see you do it."
Nick just smiles and says, "There's a girl with hair on her chest." It is a bizarrely affectionate moment of violence that only works in a screwball comedy.
She doesn't even realize he's bleeding at first. And through this whole shootout, where is their brave police dog, Asta?
Hiding under the bed, whimpering. Nora jokes that the dog has more sense than her husband.
The next morning is Christmas Day. Nick is relaxing on the sofa, shooting a brand new air pistol at balloons on the Christmas tree.
He even tries a trick shot using a hand mirror and shatters a window instead.
The newspapers are having a field day with the shootout. Nick reads out loud, "I was shot twice in the Tribune."
Nora replies, "I read where you were shot 5 times in the tabloids."
Nick deadpans, "It's not true. He didn't come anywhere near my tabloids." The wordplay is just relentless.
Amidst the joking, they get a telegram supposedly from Wynant, asking Nick to take the case and contact Macaulay.
Nora argues that a guilty man wouldn't hire a detective. But Nick still refuses to get involved.
Then Macaulay calls with terrible news. The police need him to identify a body. Wynant has apparently committed suicide.
Macaulay is visibly shaken, assuming the suicide is an admission of guilt.
Nora is deeply disappointed that the mystery is over. She literally tells the dog, "Asta, is your balloon busted? So's mine."
But this is the crucial turning point for Nick. He suddenly senses something is wrong.
He tells Nora, "I'm gonna find out. I'm tired of being pushed around. Come on, Dr. Watson, let's go places."
The game is afoot. They run into Lieutenant Guild, who admits the suicide report was false. But Guild still firmly believes Winant is the murderer.
Nick mentions Nunheim, the informant who was hanging around Julia. Guild wants to question him, and Nick tries to go alone, but Nora insists on coming.
So Nick, being Nick, tricks her into a cab and sends her to Grant's tomb just to keep her safe and out of the way.
Nick and Guild track down Nunheim. The guy is slippery. He feigns remorse when his girlfriend Marion storms out, asks to grab something from the bedroom, and just escapes down the fire escape.
Guild has a colleague tail him.
Which is fortunate because Nunheim goes straight to a payphone to blackmail the real killer for $5,000. He goes to a location to collect the cash and is shot dead with the same gun that killed Julia.
Meanwhile, Nora calls Nick from Mimi's apartment. She sarcastically says Grant's tomb is lovely and she's having a copy made for him.
She has actually done some investigating of her own. Mimi's new husband, Chris Jorgensen, has mysteriously disappeared.
Mimi defends him initially, then abruptly pivots and gives the police the watch chain she stole from Julia, trying to definitively close the case on Winant.
Dorothy is so crushed by this, quote, proof of her father's guilt that she breaks off her engagement to Tommy, terrified she'll pass on murderer genes.
The headlines go crazy. Winant wanted in second murder case. A massive reward is posted.
So Nick and Asta go to search Winant's shuttered, shadowy workshop.
They search the dark workshop by flashlight. Asta starts scratching frantically at the floorboards.
Nick realizes Asta is acting more like a trained police dog than a pampered terrier.
Finally, the dog contributes something useful to the investigation.
Suddenly, an intruder appears in the dark. Nick tries to bluff him by commanding Asta to attack, but the dog immediately cowers.
The intruder turns out to be Tanner, the ex-convict bookkeeper. There is a great little detail here where Tanner explains he learned bookkeeping while incarcerated at Sing Sing prison. He claims he just came back to fix the ledgers because he'd embezzled some money himself.
The police arrive and analyze the buried body. It's badly decomposed from the lime.
Guild sees a belt buckle nearby with the initials DWR and assumes it belongs to an old rival inventor.
Guild theorizes Winant killed his rival, buried him in the basement, and fled the state.
But Nick looks closer at the x-rays with the coroner. He spots an old shrapnel wound in the leg bone.
And that is the massive plot twist. Nick knows Winant had that exact war wound from his military service.
The body in the basement isn't a victim of Winant. It is Winant.
He has been dead for months, meaning he couldn't possibly have killed Julia or Nunheim.
The press is hounding Nick, asking about his next step. He jokes, "Right back to California, we've got to go home and rest up from this vacation."
He even teases Nora, "My soul woman, I give you 3 murders and you're still not satisfied."
But Nick keeps the discovery of the body a secret, even from a grieving Dorothy. He has a plan. He is setting up the classic drawing room reveal.
He hosts a massive formal dinner party at their suite. He invites literally every suspect in the case.
Macaulay, Mimi, Jorgensen, Morelli, Marion, Tanner, even Dorothy and her brother Gilbert are there.
And he flanks the dining room with undercover police officers dressed as white-jacketed waiters.
The tension is fantastic. Nick gives a polite toast and then just drops the bomb on the room. He says, "Clyde Winant did not kill Julia. He didn't kill Nunheim or anyone. I saw him last night."
At the city morgue, of course. But Mimi lies through her teeth, claiming she saw Winant just the night before to get money from him.
Gilbert lies too, claiming he saw his father in a crystal ball.
Nora, playing the perfect oblivious hostess to break the tension, asks the waiter, "Will you serve the nuts? Would you serve the guests the nuts?"
Nick calls them all out. He explains the shrapnel wound on the x-ray, how the body was hidden and dressed in baggy clothes with a fake belt buckle to throw off the cops.
He announces, "The murderer is right in this room sitting at this table."
And then he meticulously breaks down the mechanics of the crime. Julia and Tanner were stealing small amounts from Winant.
Winant confronted the real mastermind who killed him, buried him in the shop, and sent a fake telegram to close the place down.
The killer forged Winant's signature to keep paying Julia, splitting the stolen bonds. But when Mimi started asking questions, Julia became a serious liability.
So the killer shot her, planting the watch chain to frame the missing Winant.
Nunheim saw the killer leaving Julia's apartment, tried to blackmail him, and got shot for his trouble.
The killer even paid Mimi to lie about seeing Winant alive, keeping her dependent on the cash flow.
And the absolute cherry on top, Nick reveals that Mimi's new marriage to Jorgensen is legally invalid because Jorgensen is secretly a bigamist.
Which means Mimi is still Wynant's legal heir. Nick tells her to stop settling for small blackmail scraps and claim her whole fortune by naming the killer.
Cornered and desperate, the lawyer, Macaulay, draws a gun from under the table.
But Nick is faster. He knocks Macaulay out cold before he can aim. A stray shot goes into the ceiling and it's over.
The final scene is brilliant. They're on a train heading back to California. They have adjoining cabins with the newlywed Dorothy and Tommy.
Nick and Nora are getting ready for bed in a cabin with upper and lower bunks. Nora asks Nick to put Asta in the lower bunk with her.
Nick laughs and tosses the dog up into the top bunk, climbing into the lower bunk with Nora.
And the final shot is Asta peeking over the edge and covering his eyes with his paws. A clever little censorship-dodging wink to the audience.
Now, the film is wildly entertaining, but the history behind it might be even more fascinating. We need to talk about the mind that created this world, Dashiell Hammett.
Dashiell Hammett lived a genuinely hard-boiled life long before he ever put a single word on the page.
He had a wild background.
He really did. He was a high school dropout, for one, and he served in the World War I ambulance corps.
Which is actually where he contracted tuberculosis, right?
Yeah, a really severe case of TB that haunted him for years. It fundamentally broke his health. But his most defining experience, the thing that really shaped his writing, was working as an operative for the Pinkerton National Detective Agency.
Okay, I feel like we need to pause and clarify what a Pinkerton detective actually was back then.
Yeah.
Because today, when you and I say detective, we think of a police procedural or like a private eye snapping photos of cheating spouses.
Right, like a guy in a trench coat peering through blinds. The Pinkertons were a completely different animal.
They were intense.
Very intense. This was essentially a massive private paramilitary and security force. They didn't just solve quaint little mysteries. They were involved in serious, dangerous, unsavory work.
Like what?
Well, they chased armed outlaws across state lines. They provided heavy armed security, and most notoriously, they were used as muscle for corporate union busting.
Wow. So they were basically mercenaries in some contexts.
Exactly. It was a gritty, physically demanding, and very often violent profession.
So Hammett was out there basically living as an action hero. I mean, I read that his real-world cases included everything from working on the defense team for the infamous Fatty Arbuckle trial.
Which was a massive Hollywood scandal.
Huge scandal. But then he also investigated the theft of a Ferris wheel.
Yes, the Ferris wheel case.
I still can't quite wrap my head around that. How does someone steal an entire Ferris wheel?
Piece by piece, very quietly in the middle of the night, one would assume.
That is just wild.
It is, but you see how doing that kind of work gave him this massive reservoir of genuine, bizarre human behavior to draw from.
Oh, absolutely.
He knew how real criminals talked. He knew how the police actually operated, the compromises they made. He knew the literal mechanics of a bloody crime scene.
So how does a guy doing that kind of intense boots-on-the-ground security work end up writing Pulp Fiction?
Well, it was pure financial desperation. The Pinkerton salary just wasn't enough to support his family.
He was in San Francisco at the time.
Yeah, living in San Francisco with his wife, Josephine. And she had actually been his nurse when he was recovering from TB, which is a whole story in itself.
Right.
So they have 2 daughters. His health is failing again. He literally cannot keep up with the physical demands of detective work, and he needs money fast. So he turned to writing in 1923.
Which triggers this incredible but surprisingly brief creative golden age for him. I mean, he pumps out Red Harvest, The Maltese Falcon, The Glass Key.
Masterpieces of the genre.
But the path to The Thin Man was unusually messy, wasn't it? Like, this wasn't just a sudden burst of inspiration.
Oh, no, it was a start-and-stop nightmare. The 1934 novel that we know wasn't his first attempt at telling the story. He actually started a 65-page draft way back in 1930.
And that version was completely different, right? Like, set in San Francisco instead of New York.
Yeah, entirely different vibe. And the detective wasn't even Nick Charles. It was a guy named John Guild.
Wait, John Guild? Like the police lieutenant from the final version?
Yes. That's a fun little piece of trivia. He recycled the name John Guild for the cop later on. But anyway, he sets that early 1930 draft aside because he gets an offer to go work in Hollywood for a year.
To make some real money.
Exactly. But when he comes back, his agent, Leland Hayward, does something completely out of bounds.
Oh, no. What did he do?
He actually sells the rights to an unauthorized, unfinished 1931 draft of the novel to a magazine. And he does this without Hammett's permission.
Are you kidding? I can't imagine a writer reacting well to their unfinished work being sold behind their back.
It was a total disaster. They
Yeah.
had to cancel the sale, untangle this massive legal mess, and Hammett was forced to abandon that version of the story completely.
So he has to start from scratch.
Pretty much. So by the time he finally sits down to write the actual final version of The Thin Man, he is under immense financial pressure. He's literally writing desperate letters to his publisher, trying to drum up cash advances. And at the same time, his personal life is completely shifting too, because he has started a very intense relationship with the aspiring playwright, Lillian Hellman.
Okay, we have to talk about Lillian Hellman, because if you've seen the movie, you know that the core comedic engine of this story is Nora Charles constantly pushing a very reluctant Nick to investigate this murder.
She won't let it go.
No, she thinks it's a thrilling game. She wants to see the gangsters. She wants the excitement. And Nick just wants to order another martini and be left alone.
Right.
She's basically like an enthusiastic true crime fan today, trying to force her retired cop husband to go check out a weird noise in the alley.
That is a perfect way to describe it. It's brilliant comedy. But what's crazy is that dynamic is pulled directly from Hammett's real life. Lillian Hellman later admitted that she used to constantly nag Hammett to go back to real detective work. She thought his Pinkerton days were fascinating, very romantic, and she wanted him to go out and solve mysteries. And Hammett would get absolutely furious at the suggestion. He hated it.
Wait, but earlier I've always heard the general consensus was that Nick and Nora's wonderful, sparkling on-screen marriage wasn't based on Hammett and Hellman. If she's literally nagging him to solve mysteries, doesn't that mean it was based on them?
That is the crucial distinction you have to make. The plot device, the nagging itself, was based on them. He took this incredibly annoying real-life argument they kept having and turned it into a joke on the page.
Okay, I see.
But the warmth of the marriage, the collaborative, happy partnership, that was entirely fiction. Hammett and Hellman's actual relationship was remarkably dark.
How dark are we talking?
Well, they were never married, for starters. They spent long stretches apart, they were frequently unfaithful to each other, and they fought viciously.
Like screaming matches.
Worse. There is a story from Hellman's memoir, An Unfinished Woman, that really illustrates this. And a quick warning to those listening, this is a bit intense.
Okay.
During one particularly bitter argument, Hammett was so wildly angry, but he didn't want to strike her. So instead, he took a lit cigarette and ground it directly into his own cheek.
He burned his own face.
Yes, ground it right into his cheek. He looked at her and said, "Keeping myself from doing it to you?"
Oh my God.
I know, and he carried the scar from that burn for the rest of his life. Hellman wrote that they never spoke of the incident again, but it left this lingering, heavy shame between them.
That is horrifying.
That was their reality, a kind of violent, self-destructive tension.
I am just sitting here trying to process that.
Yeah.
You look at that profound, that incredibly dark tension, and then you look at the breezy, aspirational banter in the movie. It's literally night and day.
It really is.
But before we get to how the screenwriters changed that tone for the film, I want to go back to Nick Charles as a character. You mentioned Hammett hated the idea of going back to detective work. Why was he so reluctant? Even on the page, he was telling his publisher this would be his very last detective novel.
To really understand that, we have to look at the evolution of Hammett's heroes. There's a critic named George J. Thompson who proposed a really striking 5-novel arc theory to explain this.
Break that down for me, because this concept of an evolving hero over 5 books is fascinating.
Right, so Thompson argues that Hammett wasn't just writing pulp mysteries, he was actually exploring deep philosophy. It starts with Red Harvest in 1929.
Okay.
That book represents Hammett's initial search for a hero. He's looking for a man who can even survive in a corrupt world. Then comes the Dane Curse, which redefines what that hero looks like.
Evolving the archetype.
Exactly. The peak of this arc happens in the Maltese Falcon and the Glass Key. That is where Hammett perfects his hero.
Right, like Sam Spade in the Maltese Falcon.
Yeah.
Spade has a very specific, harsh moral code. He will turn in the woman he loves because his code demands it.
Precisely. Spade is a moral man operating in a completely valueless world. But the Thin Man is the conclusion of that entire arc.
The end of the line.
Yes. By the time Hammett writes Nick Charles, the evolution is over. Nick is the hard-boiled shell, but he is completely devoid of the animating purpose. He has no code anymore.
So Nick is essentially Sam Spade, who just gave up.
Yes, and that is why French philosophers like Albert Camus and André Gide deeply admired Hammett.
Wait, Camus was reading Hammett.
Oh, absolutely. They saw him as the existential Hammett. They believed he was depicting man's second fall, the fall into total inauthenticity and alienation.
Wow.
Nick Charles looks at the world, realizes it is completely corrupt, greedy, and unfixable, and decides, you know what, I'm just going to check out.
It's like someone today who gets entirely overwhelmed by doom-scrolling the daily news. They realize they can't fix global warming or political corruption, so they just delete their apps, move to a cabin, and decide their only goal in life is to learn how to bake sourdough bread.
Yes, that is a fantastic modern equivalent. They just retreat into their own bubble.
And for Nick, his sourdough bread is just managing his wife's considerable wealth and mixing a perfect martini to foxtrot time.
Exactly. Doing and being are permanently separated for him. He only does the detective work in this story because people literally keep pulling guns on him in his own hotel room.
Right, he's forced into it.
But it doesn't connect to his soul anymore. He has succumbed to a kind of creative and moral ennui.
Which actually mirrors Hammett himself, right?
Right.
Because Hammett basically stopped writing novels after this.
He really did. He succumbed to that exact same creative ennui. He spent the rest of his life doing, screenwriting punch-ups, political activism, and struggling with alcoholism. But the novelist in him was finished. Nick Charles was his final statement.
So we have this source material that is anchored in severe existential dread, starring a protagonist who represents the absolute dead end of the American hero.
Yep.
How in the world did a Hollywood studio look at that and say, hey, let's make a sparkling romantic comedy?
Well, they handed it to a married couple. MGM hired the screenwriting duo, Francis Goodrich and Albert Hackett.
And I imagine they were thrilled to get a big adaptation job.
Oh, they despised it. Francis wrote a letter to a friend in early 1934, complaining bitterly about the assignment. She called the story run-of-the-mill and explicitly wrote, "It stinks."
It stinks. That's amazing.
They used to joke with each other on the studio lot, saying, "If it would only make me thin, I could bear it."
But despite hating the material, they somehow bang out the entire screenplay in just 3 weeks.
21 days.
That is absurd.
Francis later looked back in total amazement, saying, "Oh my God, when I think what we used to do." It really goes to show how the studio system functioned back then as a factory.
You just sit at your typewriter and you deliver the pages.
Regardless of how you feel about the art.
But in doing that, they injected their own dynamic into the script, didn't they?
Yeah.
Because we talked about Hammett and Hellman's dark, cigarette-burning fights. The Hacketts were nothing like that.
Not at all. Their marriage was incredibly warm, very collaborative, and full of witty banter.
They actually liked each other.
They adored each other. To give you a contrast to the Hammett story, there's an anecdote where Frances once tripped and stumbled, and Albert turned completely white with worry and rushed to catch her.
Oh.
They were deeply devoted. So when they were forced to write Nick and Nora, they essentially just wrote their own affectionate rhythm into the mouths of Hammett's cynical character.
They overwrote the dread with joy.
Exactly.
And it created this entirely new paradigm for married couples on screen.
Yeah.
Because usually, movies back then either showed the fiery, dramatic courtship before marriage, or they showed the miserable, nagging reality of being tied down.
Right, the old ball and chain trope. The writer Gore Vidal actually commented on this exact thing. He described Myrna Loy's Nora as the eternal good sex woman-wife.
That's a strong phrase.
But accurate for the character. She was sophisticated, highly sexual with her husband, and never prudish. She could drink with the boys and trade jokes without losing an ounce of her femininity or dignity.
So the script is done in 3 weeks. It's totally revamped in tone. Now MGM needs a director who can execute it just as fast. Enter W.S. Van Dyke, or, as he was famously known on the lot, One Take Woody.
Yes, though we should put an asterisk on that nickname, which we'll get to. But Van Dyke was a fascinating choice because he was not a comedy director.
What was his background?
He was a hard-boiled adventurer type. He had literally just come back from the Arctic shooting a documentary-style film called Eskimo.
That is quite the pivot. From freezing in the Arctic to shooting socialites in a Manhattan penthouse.
Right. But he had a very specific vision for this. He was tired of screen romances focusing solely on flaming youth and puppy love.
He wanted adults.
He wanted a mature romance. He wanted to show matrimonial bliss where the couple actually enjoys hanging out together.
Which is so refreshing. And to pull off that delicate balance, he needed the perfect actors. This is where he went to war with the head of the studio, Louis B. Mayer, over typecasting. Let's start with Myrna Loy.
Okay, so Mayer thought she was completely wrong for Nora.
Why? She seems so perfect for it now.
Well, Loy had spent almost a decade being heavily typecast in these exotic vamp roles.
Oh, right, see.
She played a lot of sinister sirens, often in very problematic yellow-face makeup, like the villainous daughter in The Mask of Fu Manchu just 2 years prior.
I forgot about that.
Yeah, so Mayer couldn't envision her playing a normal, relatable American wife, but Van Dyke saw something different in her. He saw a natural warmth.
So what did he do?
He sneakily started testing her in other films to prove her range to the executives. He cast her in Penthouse and told her to stop trying to act. He said, if you will just be your own natural, sweet self, you'll be a sensation. He started shooting unrehearsed scenes just to capture her genuine, spontaneous reactions.
And she was shocked to find she was nailing scenes in one take. Van Dyke told her she'd be playing plain American womanhood from then on, and predicted she'd be a massive star within a year.
Penthouse is a fascinating watch because it's essentially a dry run for the thin man. It involves a lawyer moving between high society and the criminal underworld, mixing acerbic humor with violence.
But her co-star in Penthouse was Warner Baxter. And here's the difference.
Warner Baxter was too formal. He was cerebral and a bit humorless. He didn't have the necessary spark.
William Powell, on the other hand, brought a vital twinkle in his eye. He had the same refined elegance as Baxter, but he was visibly having fun with the material. Then there was a prize fighter in The Lady.
That set was absolute chaos. Van Dyke was brought in to save it. He essentially threw out the original footage and started over. The cast was full of actual heavyweight boxers.
Max Baer, Primo Carnera, Jack Dempsey, all these massive guys.
And Myrna Loy is the only woman among a dozen ex-champions. They teased her mercilessly. Max Baer apparently wired her chair to shock her.
Jack Dempsey gave her an exploding cigarette. They treated her like one of the guys, but they were relentless.
So she decided she had to get revenge to survive the shoot.
She found out a secret about Max Baer. This huge heavyweight boxer had a massive paralyzing phobia of mice.
She went out and tracked down a wind-up toy mouse that jumped very realistically.
During a huge packed arena fight scene, she sneaks up and sets it off right next to him.
Baer screams, leaps literally into the giant Primo Carnera's arms, and the entire crew just loses it.
She looked at Van Dyke after the chaos and joked, "I'm just a typical American girl, huh?"
The boxers never messed with her again after that. But that natural, playful, slightly mischievous energy was exactly what Van Dyke wanted for Nora Charles. Now, for the role of Nick Charles, he wanted William Powell. But once again, the studio balked.
Why? Powell seems like the most obvious choice in the world for a suave detective.
Well, a few reasons. First, they thought he was too old. He was 42 at the time.
Okay, not that old.
By Hollywood standards back then, it was pushing it for a romantic lead. Second, they thought he was too heavily associated with playing Philo Vance.
The stuffy detective character.
Very stuffy, very aristocratic. The studio executives complained that theater marquees sometimes just billed him as Philo Vance rather than his actual name. They thought his persona was totally played out.
But Van Dyke knew Powell personally, didn't he?
He did, and he knew that in real life, Powell wasn't stuffy at all. He was this urban, Midwestern, middle-class gentleman, very proper, very warm, a fantastic host.
Which is an interesting contrast. The Hollywood stereotype of the Midwesterner was the rough, crude cowboy.
But Powell represented the urban, Midwestern middle class, proper, educated, and refined. Van Dyke wanted that real-life middle American gentleman on screen. And instead of hiding Powell's stuffy cinematic past, they basically weaponized it.
This is where the marketing becomes genius.
Oh, the trailer.
Yeah. They leaned into the meta-humor before meta-humor was even a concept. The studio released this bizarre split-screen promotional trailer. On one side, you have Powell playing his old, stuffy Philo Vance persona, and on the other, you have Powell as the new Nick Charles.
Right.
It was a direct signal to the audience, like, the stiffest man in Hollywood is about to loosen up.
Because audiences in 1934 were used to seeing Powell as the most rigid man in the room.
Right, exactly.
So when Van Dyke put a martini in his hand and had him actively avoiding police work to just, focus on his drinking.
Which is hilarious.
The joke wasn't just that a detective was drunk. The joke was that Philo Vance was drunk. It totally subverted the audience's entire relationship with the actor.
I read that Powell's father actually wanted him to study law. Like, he could have been a lawyer, but the acting bug bit him hard.
And thank goodness it did.
Yeah, and he wasn't just a movie star skating by in his looks. People considered him an actor with a capital A, much like Clark Gable later on. He disappeared into the sophisticated timing of his roles.
Despite his elegant, on-screen persona, he always maintained a sense of grounding. He had immense depth, and part of that depth came from a very tragic personal life.
He went through a lot, didn't he?
A tremendous amount. By the time he was making the Thin Man movies, he had been through immense heartbreak.
He had 2 failed marriages, first to Eileen Wilson, and then a very brief, high-profile marriage to Carole Lombard.
And then there was his great love, Jean Harlow. They were engaged, but she died tragically of kidney failure at age 26.
Later in his life, his only son tragically committed suicide, and Powell himself battled cancer.
He carried a lot of sorrow, which makes his effervescent performance as Nick Charles all the more impressive.
Speaking of Jean Harlow, she actually factored into the dynamic between Powell and Loy.
People often assumed Powell and Loy were married in real life because their on-screen chemistry was so perfect.
But their chemistry was purely platonic. And Harlow was a big part of their off-screen friendship. Harlow had this image as a brash bombshell.
But in reality, she was quite shy, reserved, and eager to shed that sex pot image, which she tried to do in the film Wife vs. Secretary, co-starring Loy.
Harlow actually acted as a sort of chaperone for Powell and Loy. She would accompany them to the filming of the Thin Man sequels.
Just hanging out on set, cementing that tight-knit friendship. Hollywood was a very small, very connected town.
So Van Dyke fights for him, Mayer caves, and now they have their Nick and Nora, and we really have to talk about how they finally got cast together.
Right. The myth is that Van Dyke was directing them in a gangster movie called Manhattan Melodrama.
Just a quick piece of trivia. That's the movie the notorious bank robber John Dillinger was watching in a Chicago theater right before he was gunned down by the FBI outside.
Yeah. The myth says that Van Dyke saw Powell and Loy's incredible chemistry on the set of Manhattan Melodrama, envisioned them as a sort of Mr. and Mrs. America, and demanded they be cast in The Thin Man.
A great story. But the historical truth, found in the Warner Bros. Archive, proves it's completely backward.
Documents show that William Powell actually signed on to do The Thin Man in February 1934, well before he ever made Manhattan Melodrama.
What the archives reveal is that the Thin Man project was temporarily shelved due to script issues.
Because Powell was already on the hook for a 2-picture deal, the studio shuffled him into Manhattan Melodrama first, alongside Loy and Clark Gable, just to keep him working while the script was fixed.
So the timeline is flipped. They were cast in the Thin Man first, delayed, made a whole other movie, and then came back to it. Speaking of that Manhattan Melodrama connection, we really have to talk about how these two met, because it's the stuff of Hollywood legend.
It is the ultimate meet-cute.
The studio didn't even formally introduce them.
Nope.
It was a night shoot on the back lot. Raining. Myrna Loy is told to open a car door and jump into the back seat next to her co-star. She gets in, turns to look at him, and having never met her before, Powell just smiles and says, "Miss Loy, I presume?"
And the chemistry was instantaneous. They became the ultimate work husband and wife.
It's so rare to find that naturally.
It is, and it was a very different kind of chemistry than Loy had with other leading men. When Loy played opposite Clark Gable, it was very fiery, very overtly sexual tension.
Right, very aggressive.
But with Powell, it was comfortable. It was a partnership of equals who just found each other endlessly amusing. But returning to The Thin Man, what this casting meant for Myrna Loy cannot be overstated. It was total liberation.
Oh, absolutely. It shattered that vamp typecasting overnight. It gave her immense professional confidence.
She finally felt like she belonged.
And most importantly, it gave her the leverage to demand better pay and better roles for the rest of her career.
Myrna Loy realized her financial value and entered a bitter, protracted contract dispute with MGM.
Good for her.
She flatly refused to appear in a film called Escapade unless she achieved pay parity, and MGM retaliated by suspending her without pay.
The classic studio system punishment meant to starve an actor into submission.
Exactly. And they escalated it by using another rising actress, Rosalind Russell, as a threat to replace her.
Oh, wow.
It was a common intimidation tactic. I mean, MGM used Louise Rayner to threaten Greta Garbo, and they used Russell to try and break Loy's resolve. Though it's funny how fate works in Hollywood. Because of her newfound status, Loy rejected Escapade, so the studio replaced her with Louise Rayner. And Escapade turned Rayner into an overnight star.
One actor's poison is another's breakthrough.
Hollywood roulette in action.
While she was on strike, Loy lived at the Waldorf Towers in New York.
Right.
And because her studio paycheck was frozen, she was being supported by checks from her high-powered male representatives agents, like Myron Selznick and Leland Hayward.
Yeah.
And there's this incredible anecdote where the hotel staff saw all these checks arriving from various wealthy men and assumed Myrna Loy was a lavishly kept woman.
It's deeply ironic. Loy was fighting a completely modern battle for independence and equal pay, yet the society around her could only view a financially supported woman through a regressive patriarchal lens.
That battle for independence off-screen bleeds right into how the studios tried to weaponize their chemistry once she finally returned.
Oh, definitely.
MGM rushes out another film with Powell and Loy in 1934 called Evelyn Prentice. But it's a heavy melodrama. Rosalind Russell actually makes her debut in it.
She does. Evelyn Prentice proves the magic was innate to the actors, not just the script. The film is a fascinating case study. Powell plays an attorney who neglects his wife. Loy plays the wife who gets entangled in blackmail and murder. It completely strips away the signature screwball mystery banter.
Right, no jokes.
Critics at the time noted the plot was heavy and somewhat contrived. Yet contemporary reviews from Luella Parsons and Variety praised the film almost entirely because of the Powell-Loy pairing.
Oh, wow.
Variety specifically noted that Loy brought a new, natural, believable performance out of Powell. Their unspoken connection made even a melodramatic standard plot captivating.
And other studios clearly noticed because they tried to clone that connection.
They sure did.
Before Powell locked into a long-term MGM deal, he made a couple of films at RKO that tried to directly copy the formula, like Star of Midnight and The Ex-Mrs. Bradford with Jean Arthur.
Which serves as the perfect control group for our experiment.
How so?
Well, in The Ex-Mrs. Bradford, Jean Arthur plays Powell's ex-wife, who constantly drags him into murder investigations.
Sounds familiar.
Right. The script is witty, the plot is similar, but scholars point out that Jean Arthur's character leans much more heavily into traditional screwball tropes. She is frantic and maddening in a way Nora Charles never was.
Ah, I see.
It highlights how delicate the balance of Nick and Nora really was. You could copy the plot structure, but you couldn't easily replicate that purely democratic, effortless joy.
MGM eventually realized they caught lightning in a bottle.
Yeah, they couldn't lose it.
Even during World War II, when Myrna Loy stepped away from acting to dedicate herself to Red Cross work, MGM desperately wanted to make another Thin Man movie.
They really did.
They considered replacing her with Marsha Hunt or Loretta Young, but they scrapped it. They realized Nick and Nora simply did not exist without William Powell and Myrna Loy.
Which is why they continue to collaborate on other films like I Love You Again and Love Crazy, keeping that specific, irreplaceable magic alive outside the mystery genre entirely.
But, as much as they fought the studio system and won, they couldn't fight time.
No, you can't.
The Thin Man franchise eventually had to face unchangeable real-world forces. The outline points to the introduction of a baby, Nick Jr., in Another Thin Man, as a major turning point.
Yes. Academics refer to the introduction of the baby as a fundamental narrative crisis for the series.
The crisis?
Yeah, it polarized the domesticity and the mystery. Asta the dog could seamlessly transition from a glamorous nightclub to a gritty speakeasy. A human baby grounds the characters. It fundamentally altered the freedom that made the screwball mystery work.
I have to push back on this idea, though.
Okay, go ahead.
Television shows and movie franchises add children all the time and manage to survive. Was it really the mere presence of a baby that broke the formula? Or were Powell and Loy simply getting older and losing that rapid-fire energy?
It wasn't just the presence of a child. It was the cultural context surrounding children in danger during that specific era.
Oh, I see.
The introduction of Nick Charles Jr. carried a deeply disturbing cultural resonance for audiences because of the real-life 1932 kidnapping of Charles Lindbergh Jr.
Ah, the Lindbergh baby kidnapping.
Yes. The nation was profoundly traumatized by that event. In a typical hard-boiled mystery plot, a writer might put a child in danger to dramatically raise the stakes for the detectives.
Sure, happens all the time now.
But the studio absolutely could not put Nick Jr. in actual peril. The audience simply wouldn't tolerate it. It was too raw.
That makes total sense.
In Another Thin Man, they only flirt with the idea through a highly convoluted, fake kidnapping scheme. The real-world trauma strictly dictated the fictional boundaries, which ended up paralyzing the narrative.
That is fascinating. The reality of the outside world crushing the escapism of the fictional one.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the Charleses were a perfect encapsulation of elegant 1930s escapism, but that exact elegance made them incompatible with the gritty reality of post-war America.
And you see that happening with censorship, too. The production code administration grew increasingly militant as the years went on.
The leniency they enjoyed in 1934 was entirely gone by the 1940s.
Completely gone.
The PCA banned any visible book titles mentioning marijuana in the background of their scenes.
Even in the background.
Yeah. They vetoed comedic moments where Nick Jr. attempts to pick pockets, and by the time they made Song of the Thin Man, the original script called for a moment of genuine passion, a long, hard kiss between Nick and Nora.
Right.
The PCA flat out rejected it as offensively sex-suggestive.
Between a married couple who had been on screen together for over a decade.
It's ridiculous.
It is absurd.
Mm-hmm.
But the censorship was just a symptom of a world that was fundamentally changing. World War II shattered the elegant 1930s escapism they represented.
Exactly. The later movies are forced to subtly acknowledge this shift.
Right, like The Train.
Yeah, and The Thin Man Goes Home, they aren't in a luxurious private sleeper car anymore. They're on a crowded, uncomfortable wartime train ride muttering, "C'est la guerre." That's war.
Yeah.
In Shadow of the Thin Man, the murder involves a Japanese sniper rifle that leaves a deceptive wound. The glamorous drawing room mystery is suddenly invaded by the very real fears of foreign military threats.
The decline isn't just thematic, though it is deeply visual and auditory. Remember the rhythm we discussed earlier?
Waltz time?
Yes, the waltz time mastery of their environment. By the final film, Song of the Thin Man, which is set against the backdrop of the new, frantic post-war jazz scene, Nick literally struggles to light a cigarette in rhythm with the modern music.
He has physically lost the beat.
Exactly. And Nora trades her glamorous, extravagant, boundary-pushing hats for a much more subdued, matronly wardrobe.
Right.
The younger characters in the film explicitly refer to them as squares. They're treated as relics, entirely displaced in a new era. They don't understand the slang. They don't fit the culture.
The sophisticated escapism that healed audiences in 1934 simply held no power in 1947.
Which makes their final, unexpected on-screen collaboration so poignant. In 1947, Myrna Loy does a brief cameo in a George S. Kaufman film called The Senator Was Indiscreet.
Oh, this is great.
William Powell is the star, playing a bumbling politician who spends the entire movie referring to his unseen mama. And at the very end of the film, we see Myrna Loy wearing a gray wig and a sarong.
It was a massive inside joke for the audience, and it only worked because the public had completely internalized the Powell-Loy partnership as an unbreakable institution.
And my absolute favorite detail from the biographies is how that cameo came to be. She didn't accept a standard salary. She agreed to do the one-day shoot in exchange for the producers buying her a brand new Cadillac to replace her aging Ford station wagon, demanding equal pay in the 30s and demanding a luxury car in the 40s. Just legendary.
It is the perfect subversive capstone to a partnership that redefined how Hollywood operated.
But I am looking at the outline, and there's a huge section dedicated to the third point of this triangle.
Yes.
Asta, the wire-haired fox terrier. I mean, I understand the appeal of putting a cute animal on screen, especially one played by a famous dog actor like Skippy.
Right.
But why are film scholars dedicating entire chapters to a pet? Was he just an early merchandising opportunity for the studio?
That is a very common assumption, but Asta's role is incredibly complex. The writers, Hackett and Goodrich, used Asta for brilliant urban realism.
Like what?
Well, actually halting exposition scenes so the couple could pause and let the dog relieve himself on trees.
Just normal dog stuff.
Yeah, they called it taking the dog out to empty it. But more importantly, Asta was a highly calculated censorship device.
You're telling me the dog wasn't just a cute mascot, but an active tool used to bypass Hollywood morality laws.
What's fascinating here is how cleverly they did it to bypass the Production Code Administration.
The PCA.
Precisely. The PCA had draconian rules about implying sexuality, even between a legally married couple on screen. Right. In the final scene of the first film, Nick and Nora are in a sleeper train compartment, which is highly suggestive of physical intimacy.
Of course.
The code would never allow the camera to linger on that, so the director cuts to Asta, who literally covers his eyes with his paw just before the screen goes black.
That is so smart.
Right. The dog implies everything the audience needs to know without violating a single PCA rule.
It is brilliant filmmaking. And it turned Asta into a massive star. The sources note his fame rivaled President Franklin D. Roosevelt's dog, Fela.
Oh, absolutely.
There was a nationwide craze for wire-haired terriers. He received his own and Asta's screen credit, but it's the international impact that astounds me.
The Denmark thing.
Yes, in Denmark, Asta actually received top billing over William Powell and Myrna on the movie posters.
Yeah, Albert Hackett used to joke that Denmark just had a scarcity of pets, but it really underscores how universally the character resonated. So Van Dyke has his perfect cast, but the studio is still treating this like a minor throwaway B picture.
Right. They don't care about it.
They are not giving him a big budget or a long schedule. We were talking about an impossibly fast shoot.
Extremely fast. Principal photography took place mostly at the MGM studios in Culver City, with just one second-unit trip out to Mojave for the train shots. And the whole thing lasted somewhere between 12 and 16 days.
12 to 16 days for a feature film.
It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Boy later mentioned that a picture of this caliber would normally take 2 months. How do you even physically achieve that?
Well, you don't do second takes.
Huh.
Which brings us back to One Take Woody. He would rehearse the actors briefly, set the lights, roll the camera, and whatever happened, happened. He wouldn't let the actors overthink the comedy.
I honestly think that speed is actually the secret ingredient to why the movie holds up so well today.
Because it's raw.
Yeah, because they didn't have time to beat the humor to death through repetition. It feels spontaneous. Like when Nora falls flat on her face being dragged into the restaurant by their dog, Asta.
A classic physical comedy moment.
Or when Nick is shooting balloons off the Christmas tree with a toy gun. It feels a bit chaotic because it literally was chaotic. And the reason for this frantic, contained pace was an ultimatum from the head of the studio, Louis B. Mayer.
The film had to be finished in 3 weeks so Myrna could go start another movie called Stamble Quest.
Mayer basically set a trap. He thought the schedule was completely impossible, assuming the production would collapse, and prove him right.
But Van Dyke thrived on that kind of pressure. He proved Mayer completely wrong. One Take Woody wasn't just fast. He was highly efficient at conveying character without needing pages of exposition.
Take the introduction of Nora and her dog, Asta. It is a masterclass in visual economy.
We cut from Nick drinking at a table to a shot of a wire fox terrier, Asta, seen from behind.
The camera follows the dog as he strains at his leash, dragging someone along behind him.
Asta is totally ignoring the shouts of the restaurant staff who are trying to explain that dogs aren't allowed inside.
Then the camera pulls back, and we see the person Asta's dragging is Nora.
And she is completely laden with towering stacks of Christmas packages.
The dog pulls, she trips, she scatters the packages everywhere, and basically takes a spectacular dive onto the floor of the restaurant.
And her reaction is what sells it. She doesn't get angry. She takes it with total good humor.
In 30 seconds, with almost no dialogue, you instantly know she's clumsy, she's wealthy, she's fun, and you instantly like her.
Van Dyke's ability to balance physical comedy with plot is amazing. The best example of this is the massive 10-minute Christmas Eve party sequence.
10 minutes in a movie that is otherwise known for very brief scenes and fast wipes. It's a huge set piece.
The screenwriters constructed this by combining several separate, smaller scenes from Hammett's novel into one location.
And the way Van Dyke directs the chaos is beautiful. Nick and Nora are in their hotel suite, in near constant motion.
They are passing out drinks, greeting bizarre strangers, needling each other with sarcastic jokes.
And look at the guest list. It's all of Nick's old criminal associates from his days as a detective.
You have undercover cops mingling with ex-convicts. There's a professional boxer, his promoter, and people who just seem to have wandered in off the street.
One guy is sitting in the corner crying, trying to place a long-distance call to his mother in San Francisco.
And while all this broad comedy is happening in the foreground, Van Dyke seamlessly advances the murder plot in the background.
Nick and Nora are actively shuffling members of the Winan family into back bedrooms to interrogate them out of earshot of the party.
So you have dense plot exposition happening in the bedroom, while a hilariously off-key, drunken rendition of "Oh, Christmas Tree" is happening in the living room.
It's a brilliant balancing act.
Though we should mention, the nickname One Take Woody wasn't completely accurate.
Oh.
Yeah, there is a famous story about the climactic dinner party scene at the end of the film where Nick gathers all the suspects at a massive table.
Right, the classic Agatha Christie-style reveal.
Yeah.
The parlor scene.
Exactly. The screenwriters invented it entirely for the film, and it became a cliche that was imitated endlessly in mystery movies for decades. Van Dyke forced them to shoot that sequence over and over and over again.
Really? I wouldn't have guessed.
It was incredibly complex with multiple characters, rapid-fire dialogue, and very precise blocking. They did numerous takes to the point where the actors were utterly exhausted. William Powell was constantly complaining because he had to memorize pages and pages of highly complex technical dialogue explaining the entire mystery. But the real issue wasn't the dialogue, it was the props.
The oysters. The scene takes place at a fancy dinner party. They cast real undercover cops to play the waiters serving the food.
And they served real raw oysters on the half shell for authenticity.
Because Van Dyke was usually so fast, the prop department didn't bother to bring in backup food.
But this scene dragged on forever, and under the blazing hot studio lights, those real oysters began to putrefy.
That is revolting. The smell in that enclosed soundstage must have been unimaginable.
Oh, by the time they finally called wrap, the entire cast was physically nauseated. Nobody wanted to look at an oyster ever again. So he knew when to rush, and he knew when to slow down and get it right.
And they were shooting this at a very specific, magical time in Hollywood history. The sweet spot, 1929 to 1934.
The pre-code era.
Yes. It is arguably the era of Hollywood's healthiest portrayals of relationships between men and women. The strict moral guidelines of the Hays Production Code hadn't been rigidly enforced yet.
And Prohibition had just been repealed.
That's a huge factor.
So the original novel was written during Prohibition, when drinking was illicit and hidden. But by the time the movie hits theaters in May 1934, alcohol is legal again.
So they're drinking out in the open.
Yeah, the Charleses' nonstop celebratory day drinking felt like this massive collective exhale for an audience that had been restricted for over a decade.
It was liberating for the viewers.
Yeah.
But while the code wasn't fully enforced, there were still arbitrary censorship rules they had to navigate, right? Like the twin beds rule.
Oh, the twin beds rule. Yes, the studios dictated that you couldn't show a married couple sharing a single bed. So Nick and Nora are in these separate twin beds in their hotel room.
But despite the physical distance, the movie is absolutely dripping with tension and chemistry.
Which is largely due to how Powell and Loy played it. Take the scene where Nick first encounters Dorothy Wynant, the missing man's daughter. Before Nick even recognizes who she is, Powell very subtly gives her the once-over.
Yes, he totally checks her out.
It's a tiny moment, but it establishes that Nick is a virile, observant man. And Nora isn't threatened by it at all. She's amused.
She loves it.
And that sexual energy culminates in a brilliant workaround for the censorship rules at the very end of the movie.
The train scene.
It's a masterpiece of implication. The intimacy is left entirely to the audience's imagination, completely subverting the stuffy censorship rules of the era.
So the short shoot wraps, they edit the film, and the studio executives are probably patting themselves on the back for churning out another cheap schedule filler.
Just pushing product down the assembly line.
And then it hits theaters.
And the numbers completely rewrite MGM's strategy. The film had an internal production cost of just roughly $231,000.
To put that in perspective, that's incredibly low, even for the 1930s. So how much did it make?
Well, we have to look at the Eddie Mannix ledgers to get the exact picture.
Eddie Mannix. He was the legendary MGM executive and studio fixer, right? His ledgers are basically the Rosetta Stone for understanding Hollywood finances of that era.
Precisely. The ledger tracks the difference between the box office gross, the literal dollars handed over by the public at the ticket booth, and the studio rentals, which is the money that actually made it back to MGM after the theater owners took their cut.
Okay, Dad.
The box office gross was well over $2 million globally.
Which is staggering.
And the ledgers show that the actual money returned to MGM was about $1.423 million, resulting in a pure net profit of $729,000.
Holy.
For a $231K investment, that kind of return was astronomical.
It was a runaway freight train. I mean, it played for 94 consecutive days in Los Angeles alone.
94 days.
Prior to this, theaters were turning over movies weekly to keep audiences coming back. The Thin Man single-handedly revived the practice of extended theatrical engagements because people just kept buying tickets.
And this unexpected explosion forced the marketing department to do a frantic pivot. We need to address a massive public misconception right now. It is something that drives fans of the novel absolutely crazy.
If you ask anyone on the street today who is the Thin Man, they will almost certainly say William Powell. Nick Charles is the Thin Man.
And they are completely wrong.
Utterly wrong.
The title refers to the missing murder victim, the eccentric inventor Clyde Wynant, played by Edward Ellis. He is explicitly described in the text as a gaunt, thin man.
So how did the entire world get it wrong?
The critic Andrew Sarris made a brilliant comparison here. He compared it to the public's misunderstanding of Frankenstein.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. In Mary Shelley's book and the 1931 movie, Frankenstein is the doctor, the creator, the creature is just the monster. But Boris Karloff's performance as the monster was so visually striking and overpowering that the general public permanently attached the name Frankenstein to the monster.
Right, Karloff eclipsed the actual text.
And William Powell's charisma did the exact same thing. His presence was so overpowering that audiences walk out of the theater pointing at him and saying, "There's the Thin Man."
That's hilarious.
Even though the actual Thin Man, Clyde Wynant, never appears in any of the sequels, the studio was trapped by the audience's demand. They had to title the sequels after the Thin Man, Another Thin Man, Shadow of the Thin Man, purely to capitalize on the misunderstanding.
It is the ultimate flex of star power. The audience just overwrites reality because they love the actor that much.
Exactly.
But as fun and effervescent as all of this is, we have to talk about what is lurking beneath the floorboards. Because Hammett's novel is hiding some deeply disturbing literary themes that sneak their way into the subtext of the film.
Beneath the witty banter, Hammett was exploring something horrifying: societal cannibalism.
Okay, let's look at the Wynant family. They are the core of the mystery. You have the missing father, Clyde. You have the ex-wife, Mimi, who is viciously greedy and physically abusive to her daughter.
This is a terrible person.
You have the son, Gilbert, who is manipulative and bizarre. And the daughter, Dorothy, who just despises all of them. They are like a pack of starving wolves constantly tearing at each other's throats.
And Hammett didn't just invent that dynamic out of nowhere. He anchored it to a very specific, gruesome piece of real American history. In the novel, the creepy son, Gilbert, reads a book called Celebrated Criminal Cases of America. And the specific case he reads about is Alfred Packer.
Now, for listeners who might not know, the Alfred Packer story is not a light read.
No, it is horrific. In the late 1800s, Packer was stranded in the freezing Colorado mountains with 5 companions while searching for gold. Packer claimed that he and one other man made a survival pact. The man broke it and attacked him, and Packer had to kill him and eat him to survive.
A tragedy of survival.
That was his story. But the truth was, Packer murdered all 5 of his companions in cold blood to steal their gold, and then consumed their flesh to survive the winter.
Premeditated murder for profit, using survival as an excuse.
Exactly. And literary critics point out that Hammett uses the Packer case as a direct structural metaphor for the Wynant family, and by extension, the modern society depicted in the story.
So they are the cannibals.
They are all cannibals. They are masquerading behind the polite illusion of family loyalty, but Mimi will gladly sell out her own children for a payout. People are consuming each other out of pure greed.
Wow.
The historical westward expansion for gold in the Packer story perfectly mirrors the modern cutthroat pursuit of wealth in New York.
That is incredibly dark. And it's layered on top of this dizzying theme of false identities. Almost nobody in this story is actually who they say they are.
It is a landscape built entirely on deception.
Let me just list them. The stepfather, Christian Jorgensen, is actually a bigamist named Victor Rosewater. The murdered secretary, Julia Wolfe, is really named Nancy Kane. The informant, Albert Norman, is Arthur Nunheim. Even our hero, Nick Charles, admits halfway through that his real family name is Nick Cherlambodes.
Nobody is real. And this pervasive societal deception is exactly why Hammett structures the murderer the way he does. The killer is the lawyer, Herbert Macaulay.
See, I found this part fascinating because a lot of critics over the years have attacked the book, saying Macaulay is a weak villain. They argue he doesn't have grand psychological depth. He's just a boring guy who embezzled money and killed people to cover his tracks.
But critics like Thompson argue that Macaulay is intentionally written as thin. He doesn't need to be a grand, operatic mastermind. He blends perfectly into a morally bankrupt landscape.
Because everyone is bad.
Right. When literally everyone in the story is corrupt, greedy, and lying, the murderer doesn't stand out. Macaulay is just an exaggerated instance of the general societal sickness. He almost gets away with it simply because everyone else's lies keep muddying the water.
Which brings us to the most devastating thematic realization of the whole story. What does this mean for the concept of the detective?
It means that, for the first time in Hammett's work, the act of detection is a complete failure. Solving the crime achieves absolutely nothing for society.
Think about it. In traditional mysteries, the detective solves the case, the bad guy goes to jail, and the town is somehow cleansed. Order is restored. But here, Nick gathers everyone in a room, does the classic reveal, unmasks Macaulay, hands him over to the police, and nothing changes.
There is no moral education. The stagnant waters of society remain completely unmoved. The Wynants will go right back to being awful people. The society will go right back to being corrupt. Discovering the truth provides no redemption for anyone involved.
Nick even says it out loud. He tells Nora that modern detective work isn't about brilliant Sherlock Holmes-style deduction anymore. He says it's just about good advertising, putting a face in the papers and getting lucky.
It's all superficial.
The entire institution of justice has been reduced to PR and blind chance.
And that is the root of Nick's retreat. The only thing left in this broken world is the game itself, the intellectual puzzle. And finding someone like Nora who can sit beside you and laugh at the absurdity of it all, they survive a witless, graceless world by having wit and grace together.
You can see that alienation perfectly represented in how they live, too.
Yeah.
They're constantly in transit. They live out of suitcases, hotel rooms, and trains. They're physically detached from the society they are navigating.
Always passing through.
They observe the murders, they solve the puzzle, and then they literally get on a train and leave.
They desire no functional connection with the society they are in. They are insulated in their own private world of two.
And as a final, somewhat tragic footnote to all of this, that insulation didn't last in real life, did it? The pressure of keeping up this facade took a toll on the creators.
It took a massive toll. Hammett suffered a severe relapse of his nervous condition and alcoholism while trying to write the story treatment for the third sequel.
That's so sad.
And the screenwriters, Francis and Albert, actually had nervous breakdowns and flat out quit MGM when the studio demanded they write a fourth sequel. They couldn't sustain the breezy magic anymore. The era ended. But the alchemy of what they created in those 16 days in 1934 remains unmatched.
It's basically like casting a famous movie villain and an aging action star in a romantic comedy today and accidentally creating a billion-dollar subgenre.
They took the dark, cynical dregs of a post-depression existential nightmare and spun it into one of the most effervescent, beloved comedies of all time. And it really is a mashup. Think of it like mixing oil and water. The classic European whodunit is a math problem. You know, it's rigid. It's about gathering suspects in a drawing room and revealing the killer logically.
Very Agatha Christie.
Right. But the American hard-boiled detective story is a street fight. It's gritty. It's set in speakeasies with mobsters.
Yeah.
What Frederick Isaac coined as the screwball mystery threw both into a cocktail shaker, added gin, and served it with a laugh.
Isaac's definition of the screwball mystery is vital here, I think, because it highlights the defining feature of the genre.
Which is?
That it takes the high-stakes world of murder and treats it as lightly as possible.
Exactly. And that brings us to the core of why this subversion was so successful. It wasn't just the murder mystery that was taking itself lightly. It was the marriage at the center of it.
Right.
This is where Nicholas Pilay's academic work on the American cinematic marriage becomes so fascinating.
Because Pillay argues that the Thin Man introduced the concept of the democratic marriage to the screen, right?
Right. Yes, exactly. To understand why this was revolutionary, we have to look at the socioeconomic context of 1934.
Right, the Depression.
The country is deep in the Great Depression. Audiences are dealing with immense financial anxiety, strained domestic lives. What Powell and Loya offered was pure, unadulterated escapism, a relationship with absolutely zero domestic conflict.
Yeah, no bickering over bills, no patriarchal hierarchy where the husband dictates the wife's behavior.
Yeah, none of that.
The relationship is built entirely on mutual pleasure, wit, and total sexual and intellectual equality.
And the script grounds this equality in a very specific power dynamic.
The money.
Right. Nora Charles comes from immense inherited old money, railroads and lumber.
Must be nice.
Oh, yeah. And Nick jokingly refers to himself as a gentleman who basically retired from the grueling work of being a detective simply because he married a rich woman.
Which is such a funny flip of the usual dynamic.
It is. He is the class outsider who has been invited into high society. And she is the high society heiress who is just totally thrilled by his gritty underworld connections.
You can actually see this equality in the visual language of the film, too.
Oh, definitely.
W.S. Van Dyke doesn't shoot them with one dominating the frame. They are constantly staged symmetrically.
Right. The framing.
Yeah, they sit across tables from each other, visually balanced, trading dialogue, like they're playing a high-stakes game of intellectual chess.
It's all about rhythm. The entire operation of their life is based on this elegant, synchronized rhythm.
Like the cocktail scene.
Exactly. In the opening scenes, Nick is at a bar instructing the bartenders that a Manhattan must be shaken to foxtrot time, but a martini must be shaken to waltz time. And that rhythm isn't just a quirky character trait. It's a metaphor for his mastery over all the chaos around him.
I love that. And as we wrap up this deep dive, we'd like to leave you with something to chew on.
Think about this. If Nick Charles represents the end of the line for the classic American hero, a man who looks at the world, realizes society is far too deeply corrupt to save, and decides to simply pour a martini and focus entirely on protecting his own marriage, are we seeing a similar shift in today's pop culture?
Oh, that is a great question.
When the real world feels overwhelmingly chaotic, when the news cycle is bleak and institutions feel broken, do our favorite stories still feature earnest heroes trying to save the whole world? Or are we increasingly drawn to protagonists who just want to retreat, make a witty joke, protect their own little bubble of peace, and let the rest of the world burn?
It makes you look at every cynical, wisecracking hero we have today in a completely different light. Are they just cool, or are they actually in despair?
And just to set expectations for you, we are saving the broader cultural legacy of this story for a completely different future exploration. There is simply way too much ground to cover.
Thank you so much for sitting at the table with us today. It is always a joy to share these stories with you.
We hope you walk away looking at this classic through a slightly different, perhaps slightly darker lens.
Until next time, keep looking beyond the obvious. Goodbye.